A single vote in the U.S. Senate can freeze the most powerful government on Earth. But right now, a political standoff threatens to blow up the rules forever.
Yeah, we are watching the fundamental machinery of American lawmaking just grind to an absolute halt. And honestly, the physical toll on the people inside that building is about to become very real.
Right, so let's set the scene. It's March 2026. Picture the hallways of the United States Capitol right now. Aides are literally dragging military-style cots into back offices.
Oh, yeah. Staffers are stockpiling energy drinks by the case.
Exactly. We are looking at a scenario where senators might actively refuse to drink water just so they don't have to leave the floor to use the restroom.
Which is wild, and it's all because the Senate is completely deadlocked over the Save It America Act.
Right, that big election overhaul bill.
Yeah.
It's centered around measures like voter ID requirements. Democrats are aggressively blocking this legislation, and Republicans desperately want to pass it.
But they lack the 60 votes required to break the stalemate.
Which means frustrations are just boiling over. Today, you have 28 Republican senators, people like Pete Ricketts and Cynthia Lummis, demanding that the Senate force a grueling, physical, talking filibuster.
They want to force Democrats to stand on the floor and talk until their vocal cords just give out. And if that fails, they want to break the standing rules of the Senate entirely to force a final vote.
And the real shocker dropped just a few days ago. Senator John Cornyn, a man who fiercely defended the old Senate rules for his entire career, just published this fiery op-ed.
Right, saying Republicans must act now to get this bill passed.
Yeah, he said they have to deal a fatal blow to the rules, which instantly triggered a massive public call-out from former Senator Joe Manchin. Manchin slammed Cornyn online for, well, a massive flip-flop.
Because the rules of the Senate are quite literally hanging by a thread right now. I mean, the decisions made in the next few days will dictate how American laws are written for the next century.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we have a custom mission tailored just for you. We're going to explore the swashbuckling, pirate-filled origins of the filibuster.
It is a crazy history.
It really is. We'll also break down the terrifying parliamentary weapon known as the nuclear option. And finally, we will unpack a mind-bending mathematical concept called the Manchin paradox.
Right, which proves exactly why politicians use gridlock as a highly calculated mathematical strategy.
So, by the end of this conversation, you will hold the secret decoder ring for the chaos you see on the news. You will understand the hidden game theory that drives these high-stakes showdowns.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can truly grasp the physical threats and the massive stakes of this 2026 EBSI v. America Act standoff, we really need to look at what the filibuster actually is.
And more importantly, how it started.
Right, because it wasn't designed this way by the founders, right?
Right.
Like this wasn't in the blueprint.
Not at all. If you read the U.S. Constitution, you will not find the word filibuster anywhere in the text.
Wow, nowhere.
Nowhere. The Constitution basically gives the Senate the authority to set its own internal rules. So back in 1789, during the very first sessions, debates ended with just a simple majority vote.
Okay, so 51 votes and you're done.
Exactly. But there was this massive loophole. They never codified a specific procedure to force a vote to happen if someone simply refused to stop talking.
Ah, so without a mechanism to cut off debate, politicians figured out they could just, hold the floor hostage.
They did. We actually have diaries from the very first session of the Senate. Pennsylvania Senator William McClay wrote down his sheer frustration that senators from Virginia were intentionally talking away the clock.
Just to make sure a specific bill couldn't pass.
Right. They literally weaponized the clock.
I mean, if they were holding the legislative process hostage, it makes perfect sense why the press eventually started calling them pirates. Which brings us to the actual word filibuster.
Yeah, it's easily one of the strangest words in American politics.
So where does it come from?
The etymology is fascinating, honestly. The term really took hold in the 1850s. It comes from the Dutch word vrijbuiter and the Spanish word filibustero.
Which translates directly to freebooter or pirate, right?
Yes. Specifically, the mercenaries and pirates who raided Caribbean islands and Latin American countries during that era.
So they were calling these distinguished senators pirates.
Pretty much. The term entered the political lexicon because observers recognized the behavior. Senators who talked for hours were literally hijacking the Senate floor.
Like taking the government hostage, just like a pirate taking over a ship.
Exactly.
So let's track how the Senate tried to fight off these legislative pirates. Because as the country grew, you couldn't just have one person shut down the entire government for weeks on end.
No, you couldn't. But it took a long time to build a defense. By the early 20th century, these marathon speeches became catastrophic for a modernizing nation.
I can imagine.
So finally, in 1917, President Woodrow Wilson pushed the Senate to adopt Rule 22. This rule created a formal process called cloture.
Cloture, okay.
Yeah, which is simply a mechanism to force an end to debate. But here's the catch. It required a massive 2/3 majority vote to trigger.
2/3, wow, which is an incredibly steep hill to climb.
So steep that over the next 4 decades, the Senate only managed to successfully invoke cloture 5 times.
That is wild.
Yeah. Southern senators famously used this exact tool to block civil rights legislation for years. The gridlock grew so intense that in 1975, the Senate lowered that threshold from 2/3 down to 60 out of the 100 total senators.
Ah, okay. And that 60-vote threshold is the number that dominates our politics today.
Exactly.
But here's where I think a lot of people get confused. When we hear the word filibuster, we don't just think of a 60-vote math problem. We picture Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Right, the classic movie scene.
Yeah, we picture a single person standing at a podium, reading the phone book, sweating, refusing to sit down. But senators rarely do that anymore. Why don't they have to physically talk today?
That is a crucial piece of the puzzle. So in the 1970s, the Senate created something called the two-track system.
The two-track system, how did that work?
Well, before the system, a filibuster stopped all Senate business completely. Nothing else could happen. The Senate realized they had a whole country to run, so they changed the procedure.
Makes sense.
Under the new system, if a senator simply threatened to filibuster a bill, the Senate leadership would just set that controversial bill aside on a different track and move on to other business.
Oh, wow. So they made it painless. You didn't have to stand up and destroy your vocal cords anymore. You just sent an email saying, I object, and the bill was frozen. Like a silent filibuster.
You capture the dynamic perfectly. The physical endurance requirement basically vanished.
But the physical records from before and outside that silent system, those remain pretty legendary.
Oh, absolutely. Strom Thurmond spoke against the Civil Rights Act in 1957 for 24 hours and 18 minutes.
Imagine finding out your
24
electric
hours.
Is
And the
secretly
modern
funding
individual
the
record
government's
belongs to
massive
Cory
spending
Booker.
addiction.
Right. It
does.
A
pretty
in
shocking
April
realization when you
2025,
actually look at the
Booker
math.
spoke
Right.
for an astonishing
Well, imagine for a
25
second
hours
that
and
you
5
have a
minutes
savings account.
against the policies of the
And,
Donald Trump administration.
I mean, just
swore to
think
your
about the
family,
bodily
hand over
reality
heart,
of 25 hours.
that
this money
you
was
cannot
strictly
sit
for
down,
fixing a
you
leaking
cannot
roof.
lean on your desk.
You
said,
can't even leave the
if we
chamber
don't
for a
fix this
bathroom
roof,
break.
it is
The
a house is going to
brutal,
collapse.
It's an
dangerous
existential
test
crisis for the House.
of
Exactly.
physical
It's the
endurance.
Save the House fund.
It really reminds
But then,
me of a
your
passenger
car
on a
breaks
speeding
down,
train
you spend a
who
little too much on
decides to
groceries,
just
you've got bills
yank
piling
the
up.
emergency
So what do you
brake,
do?
throwing
You raid
everyone
the
else
roof
into
fund.
the walls just
You
because
take
they
that
don't
money,
like the
pay off
final
your credit
destination.
cards, and tell your
It
family,
is a
hey, don't worry,
highly
we'll fix the
disruptive
roof later.
maneuver.
Right.
Wait, that
And
raises
in
a
this
glaring
scenario,
question, though.
The roof
If
is
this
the planet,
rule is
or at
so
least Maryland's
universally
climate
disruptive,
goals.
Mhm.
and
And the
every
car is
single
a
majority
massive,
party
self-inflicted
absolutely hates it when our legislation gets
$1.5
blocked,
billion
why haven't they just
state
voted
budget
to
deficit.
destroy
A
it
completely
permanently?
avoidable
That
deficit,
is the
I might add.
core
Welcome to
tension
the deep
of the
dive.
United States Senate.
Today
right
we're
there.
exploring
The
a
reason the
classic case
filibuster
of fiscal
survives
sleight
is
of
that
hand
permanently
coming out of
destroying it
Annapolis.
requires a maneuver
We are
so
looking at the
extreme
Strategic
and so
Energy
destructive
Investment
to the
Fund,
institution
the
that it
SAFE.
earned a terrifying
It's a
nickname.
huge
The
pot of
nuclear
money
option.
meant
Exactly,
to save the
the
environment.
nuclear option.
But it
It's
sounds
turning
like a
into a
Cold War
hidden
thriller.
tax
Let's
on
walk
every
through the
single
actual
person
floor mechanics.
paying an electric bill
How does a
in
party
Maryland
actually
It really is.
launch
It's
this
become the
weapon?
center of a
Okay,
huge
let's break down the
political fight.
parliamentary cheat
You've
code.
got a Democratic
Normally,
governor,
changing the
frustrated
standing,
environmentalists
written
making
rules
some
of the
very
Senate
awkward
requires an
compromises,
overwhelming
and conservative
67
critics who
votes.
are rightly
Which, in
calling
our
this
highly
whole thing a
polarized
shell
modern
game.
politics,
shell game.
securing
And when you look at the
67
documents
votes
we
to
have
change
today,
a rule
reports,
is basically
budget
mathematically
proposals,
impossible.
critiques from
Exactly.
Senate Republicans.
So they found a
It is
backdoor.
really hard
A
to
backdoor.
unsee it.
Our
Yeah,
mission
a
for this
backdoor
deep
that
dive is simple.
bypasses the
Follow the
67
money.
vote requirement
Always
entirely.
follow the money.
We are going
Here
to
is the
see how a
step-by-step
fund
process of the
designed to
nuclear
fight
option.
climate
Okay, lay it on
change
me.
is being used to plug
First, the
holes
Senate
in the state
Majority
budget.
Leader stands
And
up
we'll dig into the
and
argument
raises a
that
point
this
of
isn't found
order.
money at all.
They basically
This is
tell the
essentially a
presiding
backdoor
officer
tax
that
on
the
families.
written rule
Let's
means
get
something
right into it.
entirely
The
different
Strategic
than what
Energy
the text
Investment
actually
Fund. It
says.
sounds
So the majority
very
leader
official,
basically
very
stands
important.
up and
What does
claims
it
the
actually
sky
do?
is green.
Well,
Essentially,
on
yes.
paper.
Then the
It is the
presiding
state's
officer looks at the
green
physical
piggy
rulebook
bank.
and says,
The
no,
SIF
your
is
point of
managed
order
by
is
the
denied.
Maryland Energy
The text says what
Its
it
whole
says.
stated
Which is the
purpose
only
is to
logical
reduce
response.
energy
Right.
bills,
But
cut
here's the
waste,
trick.
and fund
Majority Leader
renewable
immediately
energy.
appeals
like
the
solar
ruling of the
panels and
chair.
efficiency upgrades.
Under standard
Exactly.
Senate procedure,
But here is the real
deciding an
aha moment
appeal
of the story.
only requires a simple
Where
majority
does the
of
money
51
actually
votes
come
come
from?
from.
The majority party
Because they
just
aren't just
votes in
taxing
unison
you
to
directly
override the
for it.
chair.
And
No,
the
and that's
moment
why
they hit
politicians
51
absolutely
votes,
love it. It
they
feels free.
establish a
So about
brand new
40%
binding
comes from
precedent
regional
that
carbon
completely
auctions.
overwrites the
But the
official
big chunk,
written
the one
rules.
growing like crazy,
That is
comes from
crazy.
something called alternative
They rewrite the
compliance
rules
payments,
using a
or
simple majority.
ACPs.
Which is just a
Ignoring
fancy
the
government term for
67
a
vote
fine.
requirement It's a fine for
entirely.
failure.
Let
It's
me
like
break it down.
sitting down to play a
Maryland law
board game,
forces
and
utility
right in the
companies
middle
to
of a
buy
tight
a certain
match, your
amount
team
of green
decides to
energy.
rewrite
They
the
have to prove they're
instruction
using
manual
renewables.
just because
But
you
they
happen
can't
to have
find that
one
green
extra
energy,
player
or
at
if
the
it's just
table.
way
That's a
too
great way to
expensive on the
put it.
market.
But that
Which it
guarantees
usually is.
retaliation.
Yeah, the state gives
The moment
them
the
an
other
escape
team
hatch.
gets an extra
The
player,
utility can
they're
just
going
pay a
to
fee
rewrite the
directly
rules
to the
against
state
you.
instead.
And
That
if we
fee
connect
is
this
the
to the
ACP.
bigger picture,
And here's the
you can
kicker.
see how this weapon has steadily
Utilities
grown
aren't
and escalated over the
increasingly
last 2
just paying the
decades.
fine because
Every
it's
time a
cheaper
party
than
pushes
actually
that
buying
nuclear
the
button,
green
a
energy.
new part of the
Wait,
Senate
so
shatters.
the
And the
climate
retaliation
fund is
just
getting
becomes more severe. So
incredibly
track that
rich.
escalation for us. When did they start pushing the
Precisely
button?
because
Well, the term itself
the
gained
green
traction in
energy mandates are
2003
failing.
with Senator
Precisely.
Trent Lott,
It is
though
a
Senator Ted
completely
Stevens previously
perverse
called it the
incentive.
Hulk option.
The government
The
made the
Hulk
mandate
option.
so aggressive, and
but
the market
nuclear
is so
stuck
distorted
because it
that
implies
power
mutually
companies are
assured
just writing
destruction.
checks to the state instead of
The
going
first
green.
major
And
launch
the
happened
stats
in
on this are
2013.
just staggering.
Democrats,
They are.
led by Harry
In
Reid,
2022,
grew frustrated
this
with
revenue was
Republican
$77
blockades.
million.
So they
By
used the nuclear
2025,
option
it
to
jumped
drop
to
the threshold to 51 votes for lower court judges
Wow.
and
From
executive branch
77 million
nominees.
to But they explicitly
365
left an
million in
exception
3
for the
years.
Supreme
So
Court,
now the
right?
state has
They
this
did. But 4 years
massive
later, in
accidental pot of
2017, the
gold.
balance of
It's
power
supposedly
flipped.
for green projects.
Republicans, led by
But remember,
Mitch
that money
McConnell,
didn't
took
just
control.
fall out of the sky.
And they
The
retaliated
utility
for that
companies paid those
2013 rule
fines.
change.
So they
And do you
fired
think
back.
those massive
Exactly.
corporations
They
just
used the
eat that
nuclear
cost
option
out
to
of the goodness of their
vaporize
hearts?
that final
Oh,
Supreme
absolutely
Court
not. They
exception,
pass
pushing
every
through
single penny
nominees
of
like
that
Neil
onto the
Gorsuch.
customer.
Exactly. It shows up right on your
Wow.
electric bill.
So you nuke my
the
lower
everyday
court nominees,
ratepayer,
I nuke your
are
Supreme
paying
Court
for the
picks.
utilities'
And that
failure to
exact
meet a
cycle of
government
mutually
mandate.
assured
The
destruction
state
brings us
collects your
directly
money,
back to the
drops it
crisis
in the
happening
safe, and
today
says,
in
look
March
at all this cash we have
2026.
for the climate.
Right back to the
Which brings us
standoff
to
over
the
the
raid.
Save America Act.
Right, because
Republicans
that money
want
is
this
definitely
election
not
overhaul bill
staying in the
passed.
climate
Democrats
fund.
are fiercely
Not anymore.
opposed, so
Enter
they use the
Governor
silent
Wes
filibuster
Moore.
to freeze the
His
legislation.
administration
Now
is staring
Donald
down
Trump
a
and those
projected
28 Republican senators are
$1.5
demanding
billion
action.
budget
They want to tear up
deficit.
that comfortable
1.5
two-track system
billion.
and force a
You
grueling,
can't just ignore a hole
physical,
that deep.
talking
You can't.
filibuster.
They wanna
And when
bring out the
government
cots and
overspends to
force
that
Democrats
degree,
to
they
talk
start
until they
checking under
collapse.
the couch cushions
Or
for loose
they want to push
change.
the nuclear button again
Except here, the
and
couch
kill the
cushion is
filibuster
Green
for
Energy
legislation
Fund,
entirely.
and the loose
And this
change
current
is
crisis
hundreds of millions
highlights
of
a
taxpayer
glaring
dollars.
historical
So what's the actual
pattern.
proposal?
You
How
brought
much are
up
they
the
taking?
public
The
fight
governor's
between
plan
Senator John
diverts
Cornyn and former
$292
Senator Joe
million
Manchin earlier.
directly
Yeah,
from the
Cornyn
safe
published the
into the
op-ed
state's
saying
general
Republicans
fund.
must
Just
deal
to
a
balance the
fatal
books.
blow to the rules.
Just to cover their overspending.
And Manchin pointed out the
They
total
are
hypocrisy,
using energy
noting
fines to
that Cornyn
pay
used to
for
personally
general
thank him
government
for defending that
operations.
exact
Bureaucracy,
same 60-vote
salaries,
rule.
office
The
supplies,
historical
you name
irony
it.
is
But that's not
incredibly
even all of
rich.
it.
Yeah.
I read in the
Clear,
sources there's also a
undeniable
rebate
pattern
scheme.
emerges when you
Yes,
study the
this is
Senate.
the part
What's the
critics are
pattern?
calling a political
Both parties
sweetener.
furiously
They're
defend
grabbing
the
another
filibuster when they are in the
$100
minority.
million out
They
of
give
the
these
fund
soaring to give a
speeches about
one-time
tradition, minority
$40
rights,
rebate
and
to
cooling the
eligible
partisan
households.
passions of the majority.
Right, it's all about
Earbucks.
tradition when they're
So let me
losing.
get this
But
straight.
the very
The
second
state
they secure the
mandates drive up
51 vote
energy
majority,
costs.
they
The utility
furiously
companies
attempt to
pass
kill
those
the
massive
filibuster
costs
to ram
to
their
you
own
and me.
agenda through.
Our
So
bills
what does
go
this
up
all
by
mean?
hundreds
If
of
both
dollars a
parties
year,
secretly want this
and then the
rule
governor
gone the
takes a
moment they
chunk of our
secure
own
power,
money, hands us
why
back
do we
a
still
crisp
have it?
$40
That is the
bill,
million-dollar
and
question.
basically
Like,
says,
let's look at
"You're
Joe Manchin
welcome."
in
That is
2022.
the exact
Yeah.
math.
He was a
It's
moderate
wild.
Democrat.
And if you look
He
at the
faced
recent
immense
supplemental
blistering
budget,
pressure
they're
from his
cutting
own
or
party
shifting another
to
$80
kill the
million.
filibuster
When you
so
add
they
all
could
this
pass their
up,
voting
this
rights
raid
agenda.
depletes the
Pressure.
fund by
Yeah.
82%.
But he refused.
82% of the fund
He
wiped out.
actively
Wiped out.
sacrificed
Leaving
his
only
own
about
party's
$164 million
goals
for
just to
the
protect
actual
a
green
60
initiatives
vote
it was legally
procedural
meant
rule.
for.
That is not a
Why
trend.
on earth
That's a
would a
total
politician
gutting.
willingly give
And this
up
is
the
where
power
the
to pass
politics
their
gets
own
super
laws?
interesting.
Well, the
Because you
answer
would
has
assume
very
the
little to do
environmentalist
with blind
groups
tradition
like the
or
Sierra
Senate
Club
decorum.
or the
It is
Chesapeake
actually
Climate
rooted
Action
in
Network,
cold,
you'd
hard
assume they'd be
mathematical
furious.
strategy.
They
Strategy.
were.
Really?
Yeah,
This
initially,
dynamic is
when
brilliantly
this first
explained by a
leaked, they called
Stanford
it
University study
unacceptable.
that developed
They said it was a
concept known as
huge
the
mistake
Manchin
to
paradox.
use this
The
money
Manchin
as a
paradox.
petty
Okay,
cash
let's dive
drawer.
into the math here.
But
then they folded.
The
They
game
completely
theory was
folded.
modeled by researchers
Now they
Keith
are
and
actually
Sarah
supporting
Cragill.
parts of the
They
governor's
use
spending
statistical
plan.
models to demonstrate
about
why
strange
a swing
bedfellows.
voter, like
Why
a
on earth
moderate
would they do
senator
that?
right in
If
the
they
middle of the
truly
political
believe
spectrum,
climate change is an
actually
existential
gains
crisis,
significantly
why
more
let the
power
state raid
when a
the survival
supermajority is
fund?
required
It's
to
just
pass
raw
a bill.
political calculation.
Let's make this
They know
concrete.
voters are getting
Say I'm the
crushed by
Democratic
inflation and
leadership,
high energy
and I want
bills
to pass
right
a
now.
massive new
If
spending
these
bill.
green groups
Let's
attack
say I
a
want to spend
$40
$10
rebate,
billion.
even if it's a total
$10
gimmick,
billion is
they
the
look like they don't
leadership's
care about
target.
working families.
Now, let's say
So they have to play the
Senator
game.
Manchin
They are
is the
swallowing
moderate
a
swing
very
vote.
bitter
He
pill.
thinks $10
In
billion
exchange
is far
for
too
letting the
extreme.
governor
His
raid the
ideal
fund
moderate
today,
target is
they
only
are
$4
lobbying
billion.
for a new law
So the
to
leadership
create a
wants 10,
funding
the
floor
moderate
in the
wants
future.
4. Let's run
Meaning what
scenario A.
exactly?
Senate with no
Meaning
filibuster.
they want to guarantee
Simple majority
that the
rules.
state will
Right.
mandate
If I am the leadership
roughly
and I only need 51 votes to pass
$365
this,
million
I just
a
need to buy
year on
Manchin
climate
off. I
spending
walk into
moving
his
forward.
office and
So
offer
they
him
are
a halfway
throwing
compromise,
today's
right?
taxpayers
I
under
drop
the
the price
bus
to $8
to
billion.
lock in a permanent
You just
claim on your
mapped out
wallet
scenario
later.
A perfectly.
That's the gamble.
The leadership offers
And it brings
$8
us
billion.
right
According
to
to the
the
game
core
theory, Manchin
conservative
takes that
critique.
deal.
Really?
People like Senate Minority Leader Steve Hershey
$8 billion
aren't
is slightly better
this
for his
spin at
constituents
all.
than getting
Not for a
$0
second. Let's
in
walk
no
through
bill
their
at all.
argument because
So
it
he
really
compromises.
exposes the math
Okay,
here.
that makes sense.
They call
He
it the hidden
casts the
tax.
deciding
Right.
51st
Let's
vote.
be rigorous
He gets
about
his
this
face
logic.
on every
Step
news
one,
network.
the state
But
forces a green mandate
mathematically,
that is
he
totally
actually
disconnected
loses the
from economic
negotiation.
reality.
Right,
Step
because
two,
the final
the
bill
utilities
remains
can't
much
meet it,
closer
so they
to
pay the
leadership's
massive fine.
extreme
Step
target
three,
of $10 billion.
Utilities
Exactly.
raise
So
your
he wins
electric
the
rates to
spotlight,
cover the
but he
fine.
loses the
Step
actual
four,
policy
the
fight.
state grabs
Okay,
that
so how
fine
does
money to
scenario
pay
B
for general
change the
government
math?
bloat.
Well,
Exactly.
scenario
So,
B
in effect,
introduces
the state is
the
taxing
60-vote
electricity
filibuster.
users to pay
Now,
for the
the
DMV
leadership
or
cannot
state
just
salaries
rely on Manchin's
without ever
51st
having to
vote.
publicly
They need
vote on a
60
tax
votes to
hike.
break the
Hershey says
blockade.
Maryland
Which means they have to
families are
find
being
those extra
double-billed.
9 votes
You pay
somewhere.
your regular
Exactly.
income
And to
taxes,
do that, they
and
have
then
to
you pay
cross
this
the aisle
massive
and win over
surcharge on your
moderate
electric bill.
Republicans. Think of
It's
senators like Mitt
incredibly
Romney
sneaky.
or Lisa
It's politically
Murkowski.
convenient.
And those Republicans are going to
And
demand
there's a second
deep,
layer to this
aggressive
criticism,
cuts to
the
that
sheer
$10 billion
hypocrisy of it
price
all.
tag
This is the
before they even
most
consider
glaring
voting
part.
yes.
Precisely.
Politicians
To
constantly
secure
tell us
those
climate
Republican
change
votes,
is an
the
existential
Democratic
threat.
leadership must
They say the world is
drastically
burning.
slash the price
Code
of the
red
bill.
for humanity.
The gravitational pull
We
of the
have
Republicans
zero
forces
time
the
to
leadership
waste.
to drop
So critics
the
are
price
asking a
tag
very simple,
all the way
very
down to, let's
devastating
say,
question.
$6
If
billion.
this is the most
Oh,
urgent
wow.
crisis
Here's where it
in
gets
human history,
really interesting.
why is the climate
$6
fund
billion
the very
is
first thing you raise
incredibly
when you
close
overspend
to
your budget?
Manchin's
You
original
don't raid your
moderate
life-saving
goal
surgery fund
of
to pay
$4
off your
billion.
credit card. That is
Exactly.
the grand
The
reveal
critics
of the
argue
Manchin
this proves the whole
paradox.
climate
By
panic is just
vigorously
rhetoric.
protecting the
When
60-vote
push comes to
filibuster,
shove,
Manchin
keeping the
intentionally
government
gives up his
bureaucracy fully
glamorous
funded
status as
is
the
way more
ultimate
important to
deciding
them
51st
than the green
vote.
projects they claim are
But in
vital
doing
for our
so,
survival. He
They
forces
treat
the
the fund
entire
like
Senate
a slush
to
fund,
pull the
and it
legislation
entirely
significantly
undermines their
closer to
moral
his
authority.
exact moderate
If the
target.
money
Exactly.
isn't sacred,
That is
then the
incredibly
crisis clearly
counterintuitive,
isn't as
but it
urgent
makes
as they
perfect
claim on cable
mathematical
news.
sense.
Let's
By
talk
making
about the
himself
real-world
mathematically less
consequences
important to
of
the
this.
final vote
Because
count,
he
while
actually makes
politicians
himself
are moving
far more
hundreds of
politically
millions around
successful
on
in
shaping the
spreadsheets.
final law,
He
it
gives
affects
away
the
his
actual
raw voting
grid.
leverage to
What
gain
gets left
immense
behind when you
policy
drain
influence.
82% of the fund? It is
Well,
brilliant,
programs for electric
calculated
heat
game
pumps
theory.
for low-income
The Stanford
households
study
get
proves
slashed.
that moderate
And
politicians
a heat pump
defend the
actually lowers a
60-vote
bill
rule
for
because
maybe
it acts as a
15 to 20
permanent
years.
gravitational
Right.
pull.
Instead,
It
they're
forcefully
forcefully
drags
dragging
long-term
long-term
legislation
infrastructure
from either end of the spectrum
political
back toward the
handout
political center.
that might cover
That
your
completely
groceries for 2
reorients
days.
how you view
They're
the
also
gridlock
cutting
in
electric school
Washington.
buses, induction
When we
stoves,
see these
solar
threats
projects.
and
But
stalled
here's the
bills,
ultimate reality
it is not
check.
just politicians
Even before
acting
this
like
rate, with
petulant
all this
children.
massive
There is
spending,
rigorous
was Maryland
mathematical
actually
strategy behind
hitting
the
its
climate
climate
targets.
Absolutely.
No, when you
Not
understand
even
the game
close.
theory,
The
you
Climate
realize
Solutions Now
the
Act
marathon
demands a
speeches, the
60%
parliamentary
emissions
points
reduction
of
by
order,
2031.
the nuclear
60%,
threat,
that's a
they're all
massive
just
target.
levers
It's huge.
in a highly
But a University
sophisticated
of Maryland
negotiation over
analysis
the
shows
shape
that under
of
current
American law.
policies, the
We
state
have
is
covered
only going to hit
massive ground
40
today.
to 45%.
We journeyed from
They are
Caribbean
miles
pirates
behind.
hijacking the Senate
So we are
floor
missing
in
the targets.
1800s,
The grid is getting
to the
more
creation of
expensive.
the silent
And
two-track
now,
system,
the money
to
intended
politicians
to fix it
speaking for
is being
25
flushed into the
grueling
general
hours
fund
It's
to
quite a
cover a
timeline.
deficit. Yeah,
It is
and
a
we mapped
cascade
out
of
the
failure.
parliamentary
The
cheat code of the
administration
nuclear
says
option,
they can walk and chew
explored the
gum at the
explosive
same
2026
time, meaning
showdown
balance
over
the
the
budget and
Save
save
the
the
Act,
planet.
and finally unpacked
But
the
you
brilliant
can't
game
drain the
theory
fuel tank
that
and
proves
expect the
gridlock
car
can
to cross
actually
the
be a
finish
weapon
line.
of moderation.
And think about
The
grid
mechanics
stability.
of the Senate are
When
complex,
you force these
but the
transitions
underlying
faster
human
than technology
strategies remain
allows,
remarkably
and you
consistent
penalize
throughout history.
reliable
That is
energy
why this
sources,
deep dive
costs
matters directly
explode,
to you.
and the grid gets
The
fragile.
next time
That's
you watch
exactly
the
why
evening
those
news
fines are
and
so
you see
high.
senators
Reliable
dragging
green
cots
energy
into the
just isn't
hallways
available at
or
the
demanding
scale
the
the law
nuclear
demands.
option, you
So
now
the state is
hold the
literally
secret decoder
penalizing
ring.
the grid for
You
the
know
laws
what's
of
actually
physics and
going on behind
economics.
closed
And
doors?
instead of
You know
fixing
that
the
it's
bad
not just
policy,
random
instead of
partisan
admitting the
bickering.
mandates are
It is a
unrealistic,
high-stakes
the
game
government
of mathematical
just treats the
chess.
fines as a new
They're
revenue
calculating
stream.
exactly
Which brings us
how
back
much
to the most
power to
disturbing
wield
part of this whole
and
deep
exactly
dive,
how
the
far they can
perverse
push the
incentive.
rules before the
Let's
entire
really
system
drill down on
shatters.
this.
And honestly, the
state of
stakes
Maryland
right
has a
now in
$1.5
2026 have
billion
never been higher.
deficit. They are
Every
desperate
time a
for
new
cash.
precedent is established,
And the
the
Green
Senate
Fund
edges
is flush with
closer to
cash
becoming a simple
specifically
majority
because
body.
utilities are
entirely losing the unique moderating design it held for over a century.
If they somehow, which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over tomorrow and stop paying. We constantly complain about government budget gridlock. We hate the frustrating 60-vote rule.
Exactly.
When it blocks
the government now has a massive financial interest.
Everyone hates it when it's used against them.
If the utilities succeed, the revenue
is actually a
completely dries
mechanical
up,
tool,
and the governor is left with an
extreme
even bigger
ideas
hole
to become
in his
moderate
budget.
compromises. That is just wild.
Maybe
They've
the real
written a
threat to the
massive
country
conflict
isn't
of
the
interest
filibuster
directly
at
into
all.
the state budget.
Maybe the
It's
real
a
threat
total
is a system where
dependency on
everyone just wants to
failure.
push the
The
nuclear
state
button
needs
the second
dirty
they gain
energy
power.
fines to pay its
What happens
daily
to a
bills.
democracy
It's
when
like a
the
doctor
pirates
who only
finally
gets
take over the
paid
ship
if
for
the
good?
patient stays